Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 87 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. Our question this time comes from Jesse C. He wrote in to ask, who are some of the lesser-known X-Men? There seems to be a team that everyone knows, but I know that there are other mutants that have been on the team but were short-lived or removed for some reason or another. Well, Jesse, to answer your question, I first did some research to find out which X-Men are the ones everyone knows. I solicited my non-comic book reading friends to name as many X-Men as they could without using any outside resources. Then I tallied up the answers. Responses are continuing to trickle in, but I've got some decent data already. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the most well-known X-Man is Wolverine. If people just knew one, that's who they named. The other A-list characters include Professor X, Storm, Jean Grey/Phoenix, Cyclops, Rogue, Magneto, and yes, he was an X-Men in the comics for a time, and Beast. You may notice all of these characters were regulars in the 90s animated series, as well as showing up in multiple movies. Beast being the only one who wasn't in all three of the original films. The B-list includes Mystique, who's mostly a villain in the comics but has spent a little bit of time on an official X-Men team, Gambit, Nightcrawler, Jubilee, Colossus, Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, and Iceman. This rounds out the team from the 90s X-Men cartoon, as well as characters who appeared in at least one, but not all of the original movies. Technically, Iceman was in all three of the original trilogy, but in the first movie was barely more than a glorified cameo. From there, most of the characters that were brought up by more than one or two people are villains who never had a heroic turn, or X-Men allies who weren't officially part of the team. Although we still get a couple of other actual X-Men mentioned, like Angel, the last member of the team shown in X-Men issue number 1, and Banshee. Even ignoring all the related teams, like X-Factor, X-Force, Excalibur, and just sticking to the actual X-Men, there are still a lot of characters who non-comic readers have never been exposed to. As a new recurring feature, I'll be looking at those lesser-known X-Men and women and talk some about their powers, their origins, and their history up to joining the team and current status. I'll be going in basically chronological order from when they first joined, and so we start off our journey with one of the few X-Men who was not actually a mutant. Calvin Rankin got his powers in a similar way to many other heroes, with a lab accident. In this case, it was his father's laboratory, where breathing in an unusual mix of chemicals caused the teen to gain the ability to temporarily absorb and duplicate the abilities of anyone nearby. This included not only superpowers, but also knowledge, skills, and physical traits, like Angel's wings. In his first appearance in X-Men number 19, he was originally presented as a villain taking on the name Mimic, and kidnapping Marvel Girl, aka Jean Grey, later known as Phoenix, in an effort to lure the X-Men to a machine that he believed would make his power absorption permanent. He needed their powers to reach the machine, as it had been accidentally sealed shut in a mine explosion. Unfortunately for him, the device instead had the opposite effect, removing his mimicry powers seemingly permanently. Professor X wiped the young man's memory of the entire event and sent him on his way. Just a few months later, in X-Men number 27, Calvin regained both his memories and his powers while running into Jean Grey, both of whom were attending Metro College. He actually blackmailed his way into joining the team and was helpful in a few battles. However, just 2 issues later, in issue number 29, he lost his powers again, this time while fighting the Super Adaptoid, an android with similar power absorption abilities. While his relationship with the team during this brief period was fairly antagonistic, especially between himself and Cyclops, he seemed to find some peace and left the group on friendly terms. In the main continuity, this set a pattern for the character, where he would lose his powers, or appear to die, return somehow alive/repowered again, go briefly villainous, and then sacrifice himself or his powers in a last-minute heroic turn. His most recent sacrificial act hasn't been reversed yet, so as of this recording, Mimic is counted among the deceased, but that could, of course, change with the whim of the next X-Men writer. Interestingly, this version of Mimic has probably appeared in fewer issues than his alternate universe counterpart, who starred in over 80 issues of the dimension-hopping title Exiles. A little bit Sliders, a little bit Quantum Leap, and a whole lot of what if. This book featured X-Men almost entirely from alternate universes, who traveled through the dimensions trying to fix various Earths whose timelines had gone off course somehow and in danger of being irrevocably ruined. The Mimic of this book was actually a mutant, rather than getting his powers accidentally, but had certain other limits to his powers. In his timeline, he had become a leader of the X-Men and had helped lead the mutants to an unprecedented era of peace and acceptance by humanity. Unfortunately, this version of Mimic died fighting a villainous, dimension-hopping version of Proteus, Moira McTaggart's son. And although the X-Men now have the capability to resurrect any mutant they want to, they have set rules which includes not resurrecting any alternate timeline versions of a character, so it's likely the Mimic of the Exiles is gone for good. The next X-Man we'll be talking about also had an alternate version join the Exiles, but we'll get to that in a sec. First, let's talk about his original appearance in X-Men number 37. When we first meet Changeling, as he was originally known, he was a member of Factor 3, an organization devoted to starting World War III and letting humanity kill itself, allowing mutants to take over. However, when he learned that Factor 3's leader, Mutant Master, was actually an alien who wanted to kill all life on Earth, human and mutant, Changeling and the other Factor 3 agents switched sides, and helped the X-Men defeat the otherworldly foe. Shortly after this encounter, he secretly sought out Professor X, seeking to do as much good as he could with the short time he had left, as Changeling had discovered he was dying of an unnamed terminal illness and only had a few months to live. Xavier decided to have Changeling use his shape-shifting powers to imitate the Professor, while the real Xavier went off and prepared for another alien invasion he knew was coming. Professor X did not tell his students of this deception, however, so when Changeling died in X-Men issue number 42, in a heroic sacrifice, the team mourned the Professor's death rather than Changeling's. The switch was not revealed to both the characters and the readers until issue number 65. Other than a couple of brief undead appearances, once as a ghost and once as a zombie, Changeling, who was the first X-Men to die in action, has actually stayed dead all these years in Marvel's main continuity. However, we have seen a few alternate timelines with the character. Because the name Changeling is now one of the code names used by Gar Logan, probably best known as Beast Boy, over at DC, when the character was brought back for the 90s X-Men animated cartoon, he was given a different name, Morph. While Morph died quickly in the TV series, he was popular enough with watchers that he was eventually brought back. Then, a few years later, during the time-altering crossover known as Age of Apocalypse, a new version of Changeling/Morph appeared, with a chalk-white body and a joking attitude. It was this version of Morph that also joined the Exiles and appeared in that series for its entire run. Unfortunately, the Exiles haven't made any new appearances since their third series was cancelled in 2009, but you never know when Morph may pop his ever-changing head up again. The last of the X-Men we'll talk about this episode is one that did get a single mention in my informal poll, probably due to having a starring role in the TV series titled The Gifted, although she also made brief appearances on both the 90s X-Men cartoon and Wolverine and the X-Men, which aired in 2009. Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, although that's not her original codename, as we'll get to in a minute, has a long and complicated history full of mind control, possession, and retcons of her powers and their origins. She first appeared in issue 49 of the X-Men, released in 1968, and got her first origin one issue later, where she was one of the latent mutants who was compelled by the villain Mesmero to travel to San Francisco, where his psyche generator would activate her latent powers. Those powers are revealed to be control over magnetic fields and metal, which probably sounds familiar to you. In this very first story, Magneto appeared as Mesmero's boss and claimed paternity of the green-haired mutant who shared his abilities. However, in one of many retcons, this was later revealed to be an android, and whether or not Lorna shared any DNA with Magneto was toyed with off and on for years, before apparently being firmly established with a blood test in 2003. Although Lorna didn't join the X-Men immediately, she stayed in the book as a potential romantic interest. Both Iceman and Havok appeared to be attracted to her, although those feelings were only reciprocated for the younger Summer sibling. You may remember from last episode that Havok is Alex Summers, whose older brother is Cyclops. Lorna was captured by Sentinels a few issues later, and when rescued by the X-Men, she decided to join the team and move into the Xavier School. First going by the codename Magnetrix, or Magnetrix, however it's pronounced, she quickly decided she wasn't happy with the name, but didn't change it until she was mind-controlled by the Shi'ar agent Eric the Red, who called the woman Polaris. It's a little problematic to keep a name that was given under coercion, but it's stuck for decades now, and its origins are almost never mentioned, so it's unlikely to change at this point. For most of Lorna's history, she has not been an active member of the X-Men, leaving the team along with current boyfriend Havok in X-Men number 94, the first regular issue after Giant Size X-Men number 1 completely revamped the group. She's helped the team when asked, but spent much of the 70s and 80s as a side character. However, when the US government formed an official mutant response team known as X-Factor, Polaris signs up and rekindles her romance with team leader Havok, as the pair had broken up in the interim. The nearly 80 issues of X-Factor that she appeared in are the longest unbroken period of time where Polaris's adventures were published. However, the team broke up with issue number 149, and Lorna went back to being an occasional guest star in the X-Men titles. Although more recently, she was in both of the newer incarnations of X-Factor. The first being a detective agency run by Multiple Man, and the most recent team being an official investigative team formed by the mutant government on the island of Krakoa. That wraps up this episode, but I'll continue this series down the line and we'll work our way along the timeline. Now, if anything I've talked about this episode inspired a question from you, or you just want to comment on the show in general, I'd be happy to hear from you. Feel free to send any and all comments and questions via email to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.